So, and this seems really obvious, right? This seems blatantly obvious, but I'm going to point it out anyways. Do not talk down to journalists. Do not act like they are idiots and that you need to explain your science to them like they are kindergartners. Because they had a number of journalists at this conference who were doing panels and they complained about scientists who do this. They get very upset, right? These are very intelligent people. They're just not scientists. They do really smart, really good work. They just aren't an expert in your field. And so your job is to basically figure out where they're at, what is their level, and work with them there. And one of the beautiful things about this is that if you work as a team, if you let them do this, they will help tell you where you're going off and where your audience is likely to not understand. They will help you craft your message in a way that you will most likely reach most people. And having a good relationship with a journalist can be incredibly beneficial, starting when you're grad student and moving on in your career, because if you already have somebody that you can go talk to, then you can even ask them, is this a worthwhile story? Should I wait? Should I publish this now? Period.
Are there any other criticisms that they have?
Are there any what?
Are there any other criticisms that journalists have of
Besides
scientists?
the fact that we talk down to them?
Yeah, is that the main one, or are there more?
That was really sort of the biggest one, is condescending scientists will turn off a journalist, and not only, so they may not choose to, if you do that, they may choose not to publish your story at all, and if they do publish it, you might not like the angle that they take. That's what I mean by they are the gatekeepers, right? Like, you are dependent on them having a positive view of your story, your science. It is not worth it to antagonize these people. So, and for the most part, like, if you say, hey, I'm interested in learning more about how to communicate with journalists, most of them are very open, right? They're like, I want to work with you. I want to cover your story, right? It's just that people don't typically reach out to them, so they don't know where to start. And so I have some resources at the end and places you can go to learn more about how you can get in contact with some people. All right, when you're going to tell your story, one of the first things that you need to do is identify what your goal is. And I have this on the next slide. I don't want to jump around too much, but giving people facts doesn't work, right? Giving people, saying, here's my data, here's the facts, everyone should agree. Giving people just facts doesn't typically change their mind. You need to understand why do they care, right? What is your goal in telling the story? You are trying to make your research accessible to them, so it's at a level that they can understand. It has to be relevant to them in some capacity. Or maybe it's just cool. Maybe it's like, hey, we have some kind of wow factor that people will find novel and interesting just because it's new. And sort of draw on the idea that if you are in science, I would hope that most of you love what you do, at least to some degree, right? You are doing this because you are passionate about your work. You are doing this because you care enough to spend hours and hours and hours in the lab. Let that come out when you talk to journalists, when you talk to the public. Because there is this nagging perception, if you actually talk to people who don't know scientists in a close capacity, what scientists are like, and we're geeks, right? We are unsociable geeks. We don't, I'm serious. There are studies that show that this is what people who actually know scientists think about scientists, right? And so if you can basically present yourself as, hey, I'm just like you, except I do this cool science thing, and I'm really passionate about it, you're like, oh, that's cool, right? Science is no longer so scary. Science is no longer so inaccessible if they know somebody who's a lot like them, who is able to sort of communicate science to them. Don't be afraid of looking like a human being if you're doing this. Okay. This is going to be really important whether you're talking to journalists, the public, or Congress. Okay? Do not think that you can take that standard journal format, so your abstract, your introduction, your methods, your results, your discussion, and use that to disseminate information outside of the academic circle. That doesn't work. People don't know generally how to, they're not used to working in that type of format. They don't have time, they don't have the expertise to read through things that are presented that way. So what you need to do is start with the main point. Don't bury the main point somewhere in the results of the discussion. Start with the main point about why they should care. If they don't care, they're not going to read it. Okay, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to read what you have to say. if you can at all, make it personal, right? And this is a perfect example that was given of this is if you ask people if they think that that global warming is bad, right? Polar ice caps melting is bad. And they say, yeah, that seems bad, right? I don't want my grandchildren to live in a world where they're doing polar bears, you know, stuff like that. But then you come out and you say, all right, you've already said global warming is bad, so now you can't use incandescent light bulbs anymore. What? What do you mean I can't use incandescent light bulbs? Who are you to tell me what kind of light bulb I can use? Okay? And often we don't tie what we want people to do, right, or the policy that comes out of it, back to the story, and back to the narrative in a way that people are accepting of it, right? It has to be something that they can really grab onto. It's sort of like, if you don't do anything about global warming, right, if you don't do anything about climate change, it will, 50 years seems like a long time until you realize, actually, if you're our age, 50 years isn't that long at all, right? And now all of a sudden it's personal to me. Maybe it's in my best interest to recycle. Maybe it's in my best interest to support my tax dollars going towards geriatric research, right? There are all kinds of examples. And so you really have to be aware of why people should care. And then, what do you do about it, right? You tell them why they care, and then you tell them what you want them to do. And all that other stuff, all that introduction, all that methods, all that results, that gets buried below that. Not buried, it's there, but that's not what you lead in with. Because if you lead in with that, people are never going to get to what you want them to do, or the main points. And I have credibility here in red. I have a section later on in the talk that I'm going to come back to. Why is your research important to them? Right? Your research has some sort of return on investment in order for them to fund you. And they'll say, okay, well, I want so much. They can vote on how much money goes towards each federal funding agency for different projects. Okay? They also need to understand, this is sort of what I was getting back to, that they don't understand science. Science is messy. Science is slow. Science is not the kind of thing that fits well into a business plan where you're going to get tons of return on investment every 6 months. Like the DoD works that way, but most of the rest of the agencies don't work that way. And so when science says, politicians say, what are we getting for our investment, right? We need to communicate. It's like, there's a lot. It's just, you have to be a little bit more patient. And a lot of times it's not what we expected to come out of it in the beginning. If you look at what came out of the space program, right, in NASA, the Tempur-Pedic mattress that you might be laying on at home came out of the space program. And there's tons and tons of other examples. That's just one of the classic ones. But if people aren't aware of that, you can't speak to the science. You can't sell your story. Start local. So one of the best things to do is just sort of start by developing a relationship with your representatives. You can do it locally. If you want to impact, policy on a national level, you can go straight to your senators. You can go to your congressmen. The reason that they should care, and for the most part, they will actually talk to you if they have time, is that you vote for them. This is why it's hard to go to somebody in a different state or in a different district and say, I think you should do X. And it's like, well, you're not in my district, you don't vote for me, you don't really have as much say over my constituents, so you're less important. If you go to people who you actually vote for, because you are part of their demographic that they're supposed to care about, they will usually talk to you. And you don't have to wait till you're a PI. You don't have to wait until you're an expert to go talk to them. There were a number of people who basically said that these are PIs, these are like upper level staff people, and they said, I tried months to get in touch with this congressman, and then one of my grad students did it, and boom, within 2 days I got a phone call, right? Like for whatever reason, a lot of congressmen are really receptive to youth, are really receptive to graduate students, are really receptive to sort of, especially if you can present yourself as excited and why they should care. So you don't have to wait. I mean, obviously clear with your PI first, but don't be massively intimidated by these people. You can go through their staffers, right? Even if you can't get a hold of them, if you can create a relationship with one of their staffers, you can keep up with that even after you graduate school. I'm going to throw these up here in case people don't actually know who these people are. So the first two gentlemen on the right are our state senators from Ohio. Rob Portman's a Republican and Sherrod Brown's a Democrat. And Marcia Fudge is the representative for our congressional district, including Cuyahoga County. And so you don't necessarily have to wait to contact them until you want something. You don't have to wait until you're like desperately in need of like, oh my gosh, I need you to do this thing for me, right? Because they get that all the time, right? They are very used to people coming to them and they want something. It is a lot more productive if you can basically find a way to introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm a scientist, I'm working on X. And even if you're not an expert, compared to them, you are, right? You are an expert on a particular topic, and just you want them to know that you want to help them, right? If something comes up, if a bill comes up and it's in your particular area, and they need somebody to look at it for them, and they need somebody to give them an opinion, right? If they have you sort of floating around, they might come to you for an opinion. And if you scratch their back, they'll scratch yours, right? Create personal relationships. It's the best way to get things done. Okay, now this is where we get into the safety part of this talk. Hope everyone brought their loud bottles. I'm just kidding. So, part of the reason why a lot of people, okay, so it seems pretty easy. Why don't more people do it? It can be incredibly intimidating. Going out and talking to journalists and talking to congressmen can be very scary, especially since it's not something that we see in our day-to-day lives. And so, it's important to recognize that it is possible to screw up, right? It's good, people should be doing this, but you don't want to screw up because it can hurt your career. And so these are just some important tips to keep in mind as you're going forward. Okay, this is where we get to the credibility portion. How many people know who this guy is? Could be everybody, right? This is Bill Nye, okay? How many people know who this guy is? Nobody. Okay. This guy's Andrew Wakefield. So, Bill Nye is just a regular guy. He's an engineer. He has a BS degree. Loved by children, watch his TV show, at least in my generation. Highly respected by the people in this room, right? You know anything about Andrew Wakefield, right? But he's an MD, right? He seems like, he's an MD. He should know what he's talking about. Depending on who you talk to, Bill Nye is actually a vilified kind of guy, because he recently went out on a limb and made a comment about how creationism is not appropriate for children to be taught in schools. That's what he said, right? He made a value-based statement, and he got a massive backlash for it. A lot of people came back and said, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he's not a real scientist, right? He's just got that TV show, he's biased, right? And so depending on who you talk to, he has no credibility. He lost his credibility because of that one statement that he made, okay? Andrew Wakefield, I'm pretty sure you will all remember who he is after I tell you. This is the guy who published the original journal article in The Lancet tying vaccines to autism. This is the article that was later retracted when it turned out that he falsified data, right? He has been completely lambasted from the scientific community, right? He has been blacklisted, and yet there are many people who think that he is right? They say that he was looking out for those kids with autism. He is, because he's not in the pocket of Big Pharma, he's a good guy. We can trust him. And so this sort of gets into what I want to tell you is that credibility is based entirely on, is the decision that an audience makes about who they're going to believe. Okay? It is not how many papers you have published, how many letters you have after your name, or whether or not you look like your audience. Right? It's not, oh, they look like me, so I'll trust them. It is entirely domain specific. So it is conferred upon you. Your credibility is conferred upon you by a specific group. I could be standing in front of all of you, and depending on your biases, you may think that I'm wrong. You may think that I'm completely full of something not nice. And so, but I trust that you don't, right? I trust that I have presented myself in such a way that I think that you perceive me to have your best interest in mind. I'm not trying to pull one over. I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm not trying to convince you to do something that is against your best interest. And that is really what it comes down to, is that if an audience perceives you to be trying to manipulate them, perceives that you do not have their best interest in mind, it does not matter if you are the world's most scientific expert on a given topic. You have no credibility, therefore you have no